I want to ask you guys, this might take a sec too, but I want to hear if you can give me like some summary of your psychedelic experiences and how that impacted your religious worldview. Like, if it brought you back to one or if it changed it? I'd love to hear each of yours and then ask you some questions about mine as well. So, Emilee, would you like to start?
Sure. Um, let's see how to start. I had just started realizing I was like 19 or 20. Like at 18, as soon as I got out of my house and into college, that I started reading books about early Christianity and about religion because for some reason that was like this is a gap. I don't understand this and I really need to understand this. So I was doing that for a couple of years, but it wasn't working. I was just reading like historical criticisms basically, or hi historical accounts of Christianity. And it was not helping. So this was kind of the central issue that was already present when I tried psychedelics, which isn't necessarily the case for everybody. Um, and I had found Jung, and that was super helpful because I dream a lot and I think in images. So just having that was really helpful. But then I bumped into somebody that just offered me acid almost as soon as we started talking, and that had never happened before. I wasn't like aware of like drugs really before that. I didn't know people who were doing anything like that. Even though I went to art school, it's kind of weird. You would think that that would just be everywhere, but um, it's kind of a conservative town, I guess. So that happened, and I was like, well, yes, because this sounds exciting, and I've heard this kind of intimation that this will give me something new, I guess. And everything was really stale. So I did the thing, and the first time almost nothing happened. I was just like, wow, that was crazy. The second time I had like this mystical kind of experience, um, that as soon as it was over, I mean, as soon as it happened, really, but after the experience kind of wore off, I knew that I believe in God, that there's no way that I could not believe in God now. And I had really been struggling with that before because I'm like, I don't feel it. Like it sounds nice, but how do you know? Like, why would I just believe it? Um, it seemed arbitrary. Like it sounds good, but why? So that happened and it just blew away every doubt, every not sure why would that be a thing. It was so present, it was so real. And it really showed me how far away I was from living in a way that would be properly in alignment with that. And I did not know how I could get to that place, but I knew that I was really far away from it.
Can I ask how you realized that? Like what was it in the experience that made you realize what were you feeling that made you realize like I'm not living in alignment with those things?
Well, it was so there was a certain point within the experience where it was just so overwhelmingly like this feeling of love and um something that was not me. I mean, it was just so not, it was not me in my head with myself. So, and throughout the rest of the experience, this trip or whatever, the patterns that I was seeing were so tangible. Like I saw that everything has a purpose and a meaning to it that's unfolding all the time. And that everything had to be a part of it. Like I couldn't see that I was necessarily a part of it, but if I saw everything else as a part of it, then I'm like, well, probably I'm in that too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the good part was so good. It wasn't just a feeling of feeling good. It was like there's really nothing else. There's no other thing that you would ever need if you were in that state, I guess. I don't, it's very hard to describe, but I don't know, it threw me so far down afterward because it was just this peak experience where I'm like, I don't need anything else. Like if you have this like loving presence that's like all encompassing and there's nothing missing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it made me
Do you
very
mean you
aware of
had to
what was
recover
missing.
from it kind of? It threw you so far down after were you like
I was so aware of how I was missing the mark on so many things. I think I
Okay.
didn't know that
Uh-huh.
I had agency in my life before that. I really didn't feel like I was acting like a person before that. I was alive, but I was like, well, everything kind of happens to me. I'm kind of like this receptacle for the world just happens to me. I didn't think I could do anything about it or that I should, that I had a responsibility. And I'd also been like overwhelming myself with Jordan Peterson, but I wasn't really acting on it. It didn't it didn't do anything. I wasn't doing anything with it. It was just in my head. So it just showed me how small I was and how I was just actively making things worse for
Hmm.
myself.
You'd like learned so many new things, but they hadn't been integrated into how you're behaving. And so that you felt that
Totally. Yeah.
dissonance. Hmm.
Yeah. Right. So it was this big experience that comes, but then I'm like, I'm not acting on it. It's not real. I'm not manifesting it in the reality of the world. Like
Hmm.
things that are just in your head aren't really real. I mean, they're real when you make them real outside too. Like the inside and the outside have to kind of match.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, so you
hopefully,
feel
right? Like
that.
that's the
Hmm.
tension. It's horrible. And I was like, oh, it was terrible. So the next few years were really rough, actually, because of that. But I at least knew now. I was like, well, definitely there's a God, and definitely there's a direction to go. So I'm just gonna like that's the only thing now to focus on. There's no other thing as important as that. But it wasn't just hearing a Jordan Peterson lecture and he's like, you have nothing else to do. I'm like, no, I feel it now. Like I feel it. So um so that really changed the direction of my life. And I easily sort of slipped into the Christian, I don't know, I don't go to church, which I kind of feel bad about, but I'm my way of dealing with it is like being soaked in the images, I guess,
Hmm.
and really um, respecting that tradition and wanting to be in touch with it, however that works for me, I guess, or however that makes sense in my context. So, so I told Paul that I took acid and I'm like young and acid and this and he's like, whoa, he's a pastor. He's people aren't telling him that every day. Um, but there's definitely a bunch of people who've had that. I talked to a bunch of people after that who were like, yeah, me too. That was really helpful. So it definitely turned everything around and set me on that direction.
Hmm. Hmm. Lucas.
So, do you guys mind if I quickly take a bathroom break? Because I know we
Oh
have a
yeah,
bit.
let's do it.
I'm
Let's take
used
a
to
little
90
five
minutes.
minute breather. Yeah, yeah,
Five
that's
minutes?
perfect.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing, by the way, Emily. I haven't heard it in depth so much, so it's really cool.
Hmm.
Thanks.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What was your psychedelic? How did psychedelics affect your
Yeah.
religious view of the world and you as a person?
Yeah. So, like I told you before, I kind of abandoned the Protestantism I was brought up in as a kid. So, my parents told me that I should go to church until I was 18, basically. And then I got so annoying about it that at like 17, they were like, okay, let's just give up on this guy.
Mm.
But I would still read um, like religious literature with my dad and we would like discuss it. So we would still have this, but it would take less time, which was nice for me. Um, but yeah, so I finished my high school, got into a gap year, and this was kind of when I like switched gears in my life. I went from being like very cynical, wanting to be normal, like we discussed, to like wanting to be really good and really good in a sense of like really successful. So I started um, meditating and reading and learning musical instruments and like language learning, all these things. I don't know why, but something drove me to do that. And I started listening to podcasts. And yeah, I just heard people talk about psychedelics in such a like magical way. You know, I always spoke about like the magic being sucked out of the world. These were like the
Sure.
first accounts that I heard was like, oh wow, this is actually because when I hear it from religious people, when I used to hear it from religious people, it was like, yeah, okay, but that's all in your head or whatever. But the way these people described it is like, oh, they actually believe that there's something there. Like they
Hmm.
oftentimes they were like much more rational, so to speak, and they would have this experience, and it was just like break them open. So that was partially my pull toward it, like a deep curiosity of like, what's this actually like? Because these accounts are magical, and then I kind of have like an extreme personality in the sense that I want to do things fully or not at all. So I went like the most powerful experience I could find. So that was ayahuasca, and like
Oh, you did ayahuasca. I didn't know that.
yeah,
Mhm.
that I seem like everyone that did that kind of came out of it like what, like
Where?
everything changed.
In the
But
Netherlands
in the
or?
Netherlands, yeah. So it's
Mhm.
basically illegal, but it's kind of like they have a website, and it's kind of like I went to the place and they
Buy
have
some
like
in
a
Bitcoin?
sign, huh?
You buy some in Bitcoin? No?
Well, I had to pay in cash from like a Romanian
Okay.
bank. So partially went to a Romanian bank and partially was cash. It was kind of shady, but like you
I
could tell
love how we
that the
just chat
Dutch.
about this stuff on the internet. You know, it's all good.
Well, it's
Yeah.
okay because I really think that authorities don't care about it for some reason,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, because it's kind of public. So anyway, did that. My dad brought me there. It's like another side of the country, and
Mm.
my parents were like very involved with me and worried about me as I was doing this because like I was still living with my parents, and they're like, "You are free to make your own choices, but let us at least like pray for you and try to be
Wow,
there
that's
for
really
you."
special.
Yeah, it was. It was like my dad prayed with me before I went there, and then I was in close contact with them as I got out of it. And it's actually normal to do this experience and then like sleep over there and like talk about your experience with the people that also do it. But I wanted to go home straight that evening. My parents picked me up, and it was actually really bonding, let's say. But that experience was like similar to how Emily described it, like this abundance of love where it just overwhelmed me to the point of just you're just crying and you're just laughing, and it's like I cannot even understand. And I wasn't immediately like God is real, but I was immediately like there's so much more. Um, so I had like contact with certain beings that really seemed autonomous in like what felt like a different universe, but beyond space and time type of thing. It was just love, and it was love and understanding. It was just so beautiful, and it removed my fear of death. It made me think about language and like space a lot. I was like, language is so silly, like it feels so constructed and limited. And then I was thinking about space, like space travel, like how stupid that was, like how like I thought that was everything. That was like the big picture stuff, but I was like, no, that's miniature stuff. Like that's nothing compared to all other reality that's out there. So the way it impacted my religious worldview, to go back to your question, is that it completely broke open my materialist paradigm of like this matter is all there is, like so much more. But
Hmm.
it didn't make me a Christian right away or make me part of any religion, because this time it was just very open, and I was kind of like, I can take a bit of Buddhism and then take a bit of my Zen and just make a little mix of that. And only years after that, like a year, well, let's say 2 years after that, I I became ready to like say I'm a Christian, and that was mostly through um, actually Peterson and Vervaeke as well. Um, and Vervaeke is not a Christian, but he made me aware of the importance of like binding yourself to a tradition and like engaging in the rituals so that you can get to a deeper knowing. Um, whereas if you simply take a bit of everything, you're not really anything, if you know what I mean. Like it takes binding to something to really experience what it means to be truly religious in the participation type of sense. Um, so yeah, and it affected me in the best possible way. I was very lucky to be well surrounded, because I know some people they have an experience like this and they come back to the world and they're like, well, this is not very important. And
Hmm.
like, it it gives you kind of license to abandon parts of your life. But with me, it did the opposite. Like it made me want to make my life like that reality was. It made me like appreciate my embodied existence as well. Like I didn't come out of that being like, oh, I'm ready to die and I'm gonna walk out of here. It made me realize I don't need to be afraid of death, but it's not my time yet. And there's beautiful things to do. And it made me infinitely more loving as a person. Like my relationship with my family got so much better. And just telling people I love them that I love, like I never did that, but I just did that all the time. And first, my siblings, I have five siblings, like they weren't really buying it. And then after a while, they start to realize like it's actually becoming part of your character and it's not just a little 2 week thing you're into. Um, but I will say one more thing about the experience is that I, so I told you like I wanted to go home that evening. It was because it was so overwhelming that when I got down from it, I got really scared, like horrified, scared, because I felt like I was stuck in this in between space. And it was the most anxiety ridden place I ever went to. And I told myself like you're never to do this again, but it was worth it. I felt like it was worth it, but I came down from it being extremely confused. Like I couldn't speak for 2 hours, and I would check this apple, like they gave us food and stuff, and I would check if it was actually real. Um,
Uh-huh.
so yeah, it blows your reality away if you. I think if you like take such a high dose of everything, and but it definitely did for me. But it was at the same time a bit of an odd experience because I felt uncomfortable kind of in the space where I got back to. And all the people that did it, like there was a group of, I don't know, 10 people, all of them had like serious issues. Like they came to solve issues that therapists couldn't solve. And they were all like 30 plus years old. And I was just there being like, yeah, I'm curious. I want to be a better
Just
person.
checking it
I was
out.
like
Yeah.
18, like what am I doing here?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of double in that sense, but yeah, that's what it did for me. And I'm still almost every day I think about it because I'm still learning from the experience, how it impacts my worldview and how I should relate to it, let's say. Because for a while there I just like absolutized it, like this is the peak. This is what I should get to. And I told you like I didn't want to do it again, but even shortly after, like 2 months after, I was like, no, but I don't want to do it again. And you start to like get curious again. Now I'm
Uh,
no longer in that space, but yeah.
that's there's a couple things. There's like five things that are interesting to me about what you just said. The last, I'll start with four. Um, but it's interesting how I can't imagine what the experience would have done to me when I was 18. I like I was such a different person by the time that I had mushrooms, which is interesting. So we got ayahuasca, LSD.
Holy Trinity.
Yeah, who knows?
Straight
So
to heresy.
there's I'm trying to recall my questions from what you were talking about. There was, you talked about saying I love you to your siblings and stuff like that more and more often. And I feel like for me, there was this, there's this feminine association with nature, right? And when people, and I feel like perhaps, I think this is ayahuasca. LSD, I guess, is like perhaps more synthetic, but I think it's this, roughly the same things are happening from a neural circuitry perspective. For me, I felt like there was like a reintegration of emotion coming out of it, a reintegration of love, a reintegration of like learning that, like feelings come from the body, right? And I feel like I was permanently changed afterwards to have much more attention to my intuition and my feelings and sort of like in some ways like an integration of the feminine that I'd neglected. Um, and that manifested in me, yeah, like being a lot more comfortable, like telling people that I loved them, telling my bros that I loved them, like that sort of thing. My experience was I had two different like significant experiences. So I'd done like a couple like micro doses, kind of like dip my toes in the water, trying to figure out what was going on. Um, I think I'd probably like smoked weed for a couple years before this, and I was like coming out of, again, like I said earlier, kind of like a darker time in life. I was um reading and writing and trying to sort through like, okay, well, I'm noticing everyone around me is anxious and depressed, and I too am anxious and depressed, and like, what the hell is up with that? Like it wasn't always that way for me in my life, and it wasn't always that way for the people around me. Um, and so I was out of the country and I did mushrooms twice. The first time was very similar to the experiences that you guys are talking about. So I was like immersed in love, like bathed in this experience that I never felt before. And it was um I felt like I was in tune with the source. I remember that word coming up a lot and being like, okay, this is real. There are things that are real. It shattered my materialist worldview. Um, and it made me think that like this all matters. What you do matters. Um, the second experience I had was the first was I won't just similar to what you guys laid out. The second was the opposite. So I had an experience of like love, joy, peace wash over me. And then I had an experience of just like complete and total hell, essentially. And it it like rattled me to my core, but it was like equally useful in a way because it was like, oh, that's real too. Like the suffering that people experience, that I experience. Um, it was real and it made me think like, okay, these are things that we have to deal with and navigate in this life. Um, what else would I want to touch on about it? It's so funny. I talk about these things so often and it's so easy for me to talk about. And then now it doesn't feel that way because I'm self-conscious, it seems. Um,
Can I ask you a question?
yes.
Did it, well, maybe, I guess I don't know your general disposition about this exactly, but psychedelics and Christianity aren't exactly,
Mhm.
um, they don't exactly fit together. Did it change how you felt about any of that? Or, like religion in general, maybe this having this structure, this tradition that, and then there's this experience that's so outside of it. Did it
This is
do anything for you in that way?
that's a great question because it is putting me back on the right track. So before I did psychedelics, before I did mushrooms the first time, I went through the entire Genesis series. And part of what I was actually trying to do with the mushrooms was the Abrahamic stories impacted me a lot. And one of the main things was like go up and out from your father's house into the land of the unknown. Right? That was one of the main things that really stuck with me of like, okay, like don't stay put, go up and out, and that's where God will develop you. He won't develop you in your father's tent, so to speak, which I moved out when I was like 17, but I was, in my cultural father's tent, and so I moved abroad. And the second thing that I was reflecting on a lot before that too was Jacob wrestling with God. And that is a really like psychedelic, like, in the account in Genesis feels psychedelic, sort of. And for me, that's what I was actually trying to do. I felt like, okay, I like prayed over it before. I kind of was like, there had been a number of things that had made me think like, I feel like I'm not aligned properly spiritually. but I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I don't know what I'm supposed to do about it. And so I prayed over it and I was like, God, like I believe in a God that like responds well. When Jacob is wrestling with God, he like grabs him and he's like, bless me. He's like, kind of got him pinned and he's like, bless me. And so and so there was some element of that that felt like it felt risky. It felt dangerous. I was like, I'm not sure, like, am I doing something I'm not supposed to? I don't know. But I like held on to the fact that like if the God that I've read about in the Bible is accurately depicted, then I think he's the type of God that rewards the person who's like, all right, I'm taking a leap, I'm jumping, like I'm jumping out there. I told a friend after doing mushrooms that I wouldn't recommend them if you don't have peace about the idea that I said I wouldn't recommend doing mushrooms if you don't feel like you can walk in the realm where angels and demons roam and feel like you're in there with the good guys. So if you're like not so sure about that, if you're like not so sure if you're gonna be headed in there with the good guys, like, I might take it easy essentially. So all of that for me was it had this like explicit like I had been having the beginnings of that re-enchantment from a Christian perspective, sort of. And it was like, okay, well, like I'm gonna take a leap and like ask you to show up, essentially. And it was so fascinating, the response that I got, right? Because the first one was this love, bliss, peace, just like, wow, like we can do anything, we can make the world so great, like wouldn't it be so lovely if we could like bring this image of heaven on earth into to fruition. And then yeah, the fact that I think it was it was wise of God in my judgment, but like the fact that the second response I got was the opposite. It tempered me, like in it that balance. I needed that balance. I think I think I can have like you're talking about Jordan Peterson having like, he's manic in his temperament. I'm that way too, I think. I think I'm like what you used to, from a clinical perspective, they would call it like manic depressive, right? You see this in Kanye. Thankfully, and perhaps, maybe I'd be a wealthy star if I was as manic depressive as Kanye, who knows? But I would say also thankfully, like, it's a bit less that way, but yeah, I can relate to that. And so that having that balance was good for me from those experiences, I think. Um, is there anything else I want to touch on here? Let me think for 9 seconds and I'll cut it out in the edit if I need to.
Actually, we talked about that experience. I remember back at the time, maybe or after you had that
Soon
experience.
after, very soon after, I
Yeah.
think like a month after, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit, and it was funny because I'd had the same experience. Um, Not with the mushrooms, but again, I had somebody had given me like a bag of little acid tabs, and so I was like, well, we can just have that good feeling again whenever we want, right? And it didn't work that way. Um, I was like chasing that peak experience, and the next time I did it, it was awful. It was so hellish and terrible that I didn't do it. I didn't do anything. I think I did a little bit of mushrooms maybe a few years later, like significantly less. I was like, I don't need this in my life all the time. But it was, like you said, wise. It was like a kick in the ass, like, hey, you don't, this is not what it's about. You
Right.
don't need
This
to
is
just
just a
be,
painting for you. It's just, this isn't reality.
yeah,
This is just something for you to observe. Yeah.
right. This is like a teaching moment, and now you move on. You don't,
Hmm.
this isn't going to become how you're going to live your life or something like that. So, um, I don't know what else to say about that except for that it was very valuable. And I think it's interesting that it happened to both of us, and I wonder how many other people have that experience, if it works or not. Because some people it doesn't seem to work on, they keep going. I know a few people
Hmm.
who did that, but if you do get the little kick, like, hey, that's enough.
How
It's
are they, the people who continue to go on? Does it seem to generally not work out well?
I think some people are really open, the people that I was around, particularly, I'm thinking of a couple, like two people in particular, and I think it explodes your brain. I think it's really bad for you to overdo psychedelics,
Hmm.
especially maybe as a young person who's adrift, which is usually what it is, right? I mean, you're not grounded and you're like, this is cool. And I'm gonna just keep having cool experiences and I can just do that. And then you think you're gifted with some kind of secret knowledge. You're initiated somehow because you've had this experience, but you're not. You're like really inflated because that's what happens. It's like the natural response. And then when you don't come back down, you just have this drug fueled. I don't know. I think it's probably usually pretty unhealthy for people. So the people I know, we're not in contact anymore, but they're not doing well the last time. And I think that's probably pretty common from what I've
Hmm.
heard.
Hmm.
I had like after I had the experience, I kept getting these dreams about that place that I went to. So the physical place, like with all the people. And all the dreams were like warnings, like don't go back, you know? Like
Wow.
one of them was on an
Hmm.
island and they were like drinking and they were taking the psychedelics and they were like, we're saving the world and this and that. But they were just on their island, getting high the whole time. And
Wow.
yeah, I think your dreams really like try to tell you these types of things. And I couldn't because I was like flirting with the idea of going back. But I had like I think dozens of these types of dreams where they were just like warnings. Because when I left them, I told them, I'm not gonna do it again. And they were all like, no, why? Why? you know? And I think that planted the seed of these dreams of like, you know, this is a tool. It can afford an experience. It is not the experience itself. Don't absolutize the substance. Um, and don't abuse it. There's a reason they call it medicine. So in ancient
Mm.
cultures where you don't give medicine to a healthy person all the time, once the instability has been stabilized, it's okay. You can just live your life and you don't need to go out into the chaos all the time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.